What is the true measure of a person's worth? Is it the suit they wear, the title on their business card, or the balance in their bank account? Or is it something deeper, something hidden from view, a silent strength forged in hardship that the world rarely bothers to see? We are told to look for value in the corner office, on the brightly lit stage, in the names that echo through the halls of power. But what if the greatest treasure, the key to unlocking everything, was found in the one place no one ever thought to look? This is a story about a woman who was invisible, and the man who was the first to truly see her. Alara Vance moved through the gleaming corridors of Thorne Industries like a ghost, a whisper of blue uniform and the scent of lemon-scented cleaner. To the titans of finance who strode these marble floors, she was a function, not a person. A pair of hands that emptied their trash cans and wiped the fingerprints from their glass-walled offices. She was background noise, a necessary but unnoticed part of the immense, humming machine of global commerce. Every night, she would push her cart from the 60th floor down to the lobby, her movements practiced and efficient. But while her hands were busy with rags and sprays, her mind was a vibrant, teeming archive. Alara possessed a rare and secret gift, a perfect, eidetic memory for patterns, languages, and data. She saw the world not as a series of objects, but as a tapestry of interconnected information. A discarded stock report, ripped in half, would imprint its columns of figures in her mind. A frantic phone call in Portuguese, overheard through a slightly ajar door, would be stored and cross-referenced with a Japanese news ticker she'd glimpsed on a lobby television. She collected these fragments of the world's business, not out of malice or any intent to use them, but simply because it was how her brain worked. It was a gift that had no place in her life, a powerful engine in a car with no wheels. Her life was a cramped apartment where the landlord was always a week early, a mountain of medical bills for a mother whose memory was fading as fast as Alara's was sharpening, and the constant, grinding weight of being utterly, hopelessly, alone. At the apex of this gleaming tower, in an office that felt more like the command center of an empire than a place of work, sat Julian Thorne. To the world, he was the Ice King, the formidable CEO who had inherited his father's legendary company and tripled its value through sheer, relentless force of will. His suits were sharp enough to cut glass. His gaze was a chilling assessment of profit and loss, and his voice rarely rose above a controlled, intimidating monotone. But inside, Julian was a man besieged. He was haunted by the ghost of his father, a titan whose approval he could never seem to earn, even in death. He was isolated by his wealth, surrounded by sycophants and rivals, unsure of who to trust. And now, he was facing the greatest threat of his career, a hostile takeover by a ruthless consortium led by a man named Silas Croft, a corporate predator who had been his father's bitterest enemy. Croft was moving like a phantom, his attacks coordinated with surgical precision, his communications a labyrinth of encryption and coded language that had Julian's best analysts utterly stumped. Thorne Industries was bleeding, and for the first time in his life, Julian felt the cold, terrifying grip of impending failure. One night, the weight became unbearable. Frustration boiling in his veins, Julian swept a pile of shredded documents from his desk, the paper strips fluttering down like snow around his expensive leather shoes. He slumped into his chair, staring out at the glittering, indifferent city, the reflection in the panoramic window showing a man who had everything and was about to lose it all. It was then that the ghost appeared. Alara had entered his office so silently he hadn't noticed. She began her routine, her movements economical and unobtrusive. As she bent to sweep up the confetti of his failure, her eyes scanned the strips of paper. Her brow furrowed for a fraction of a second. She picked up two pieces, holding them together. "The phoenix flies at midnight," she murmured, almost to herself, her voice soft and clear. The language was Mandarin. Julian froze. He turned slowly in his chair, his icy blue eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice sharp. Alara flinched, startled, as if suddenly realizing she was not alone. She dropped the paper strips as if they were hot. "Nothing, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I was just cleaning," but Julian was on his feet. his imposing frame closing the distance between them. He pointed a finger at the scattered paper. "You said, 'The phoenix flies at midnight.' How do you know that phrase?" That exact phrase was a fragment their cryptographers had pulled from one of Croft's communications. A meaningless piece of a puzzle they couldn't solve. Alara looked down, her worn sneakers seeming to shrink against the vast expanse of hand-knotted rug. I heard one of the traders on the international desk say it on the phone this afternoon. And these pieces," she pointed a hesitant finger. "The character for Midnight is on this strip, and the one for Phoenix is on that one. I just put them together." Julian stared at her, his mind racing. It was impossible. Coincidence. He grabbed a financial report from his desk, printed in German, and thrust it at her. "What does this say?" Alara's eyes scanned the page for a brief moment. She didn't translate it word for word. "It's a quarterly projection for your Frankfurt division," she said quietly. "The revenue is up 4%, but the profit margin is down 2% because of rising energy costs. The analyst recommends divesting from their logistics subsidiary." Julian felt a jolt, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. She hadn't just read it. She had instantly synthesized its meaning. He saw it then. Not the cleaner, not the uniform, not the ghost in the hallway. He saw the staggering, impossible power of her mind. In that moment, surrounded by the symbols of his immense wealth and power, Julian Thorne realized the most valuable asset in his entire empire might be the woman paid minimum wage to empty his trash. He looked at Alara, who was trembling slightly under his intense scrutiny, and made a decision that would either save his company or shatter it into a million pieces. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice no longer sharp, but filled with a strange, new intensity. "Alara, sir. Alara Vance." "Alara," he repeated, the name feeling foreign and important on his tongue. "Your life is about to change." He made her an offer that sounded like a fever dream, a contract worth more money than she could imagine. A task that seemed torn from a spy thriller, to work for him in absolute secrecy, to be his personal analyst, his secret weapon against Silas Croft. She was to abandon her cleaning cart and enter the war room. Alara was terrified. This world of high-stakes corporate warfare was not hers. She was a creature of shadows and silence. But then she thought of her mother, of the bills piling up like snowdrifts, of the suffocating feeling of being trapped. For the first time, someone was looking at her and seeing not what she was, but what she could be. With a deep breath that felt like plunging into an icy sea, she looked the Ice King in the eye. "Yes," she said. "I'll do it." The transition was jarring. One day, Alara was pushing a mop. The next, she was sitting in a sterile, windowless office adjacent to Julian's, a room designated for special projects. The blue uniform was replaced by simple, off-the-rack business attire that felt like a costume. The scent of bleach was replaced by the low hum of encrypted servers. Her first few days were a blur of overwhelming anxiety and imposter syndrome. She was surrounded by data streams, financial reports, and intercepted communications in a dozen languages. It was like being thrown into the ocean and told to chart the currents. Julian's only instruction was, "Look for the patterns. Find what my experts can't see." His trusted lawyer and confidant, David Chun, was the only other person who knew her true role. David was a cautious, pragmatic man who had served the Thorne family for decades. He looked at Alara with a mixture of pity and profound skepticism. "Julian," he had argued in a hushed, urgent tone in Julian's office. "This is madness. You're betting the company on a janitor? We have teams of PhDs from MIT who can't crack this. What makes you think she can?" Julian's response was quiet but firm. "They're all looking at the puzzle from the same angle, David. They see trees. I need someone who can see the whole forest. And she sees everything." Marcus Vance, the executive vice president of operations and no relation to Alara, was the embodiment of the old guard. He was a polished, silver-haired corporate shark who had always seen himself as the rightful heir to the Thorne empire. Julian's sudden, secretive special project, and the appearance of this unknown woman in a secure wing of the building set his teeth on edge. He saw Alara not as an asset but as a threat, a trick, He would watch her from a distance, his eyes cold and calculating, determined to expose whatever con Julian had fallen for. Elara ignored the whispers and the suspicious glares. She poured herself into the work, her unique mind finally unleashed on a problem worthy of its power. She began to connect threads no one else had noticed. A shipping schedule from a subsidiary in Brazil seemed to correlate with a sudden spike in encrypted data traffic from a server in Singapore. A phrase used in a Russian-language chat room mirrored the tagline of a shell corporation Croft had dissolved years earlier. She wasn't just reading the data. She was living inside it, feeling its rhythms, its hidden pulse. She would work for 18 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a desperate need to prove Julian's faith in her was not misplaced. Julian found himself drawn to the small, quiet office. He would watch her, mesmerized, as her eyes darted across multiple screens, her fingers flying across a keyboard. He started bringing her dinner, sitting in the chair opposite her desk, not speaking, just sharing the silence. He learned about her mother's Alzheimer's, the crushing debt left by her father, the years of being overlooked and underestimated. He saw the profound integrity that radiated from her, a quiet dignity that had survived a lifetime of hardship. The ice around his heart, built up over years of loneliness and pressure, began to thaw. He started to see her not as a weapon but as a person, and he found himself wanting to protect her, not just because she was valuable to his company, but because she was Elara. "You should get some rest," he'd say, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "The data will still be here in the morning. The patterns shift when you look away," she would reply, not looking up from the screen. "I can't lose the thread one evening." She made a breakthrough. "It's not a cipher," she said, her voice filled with a breathless excitement as Julian entered her office. She pointed to a complex visualization on her main screen, a web of interconnected nodes. "Everyone thinks Croft is using a complex encryption key, but he's not. It's a language, a linguistic model based on ancient Sumerian cuneiform. The symbols aren't letters, they're concepts. That's why the translation algorithms are failing. They're trying to solve a math problem, but this is a poetry problem." Julian stared at the screen, then at her. The awe he felt was so profound it was almost dizzying. "How could you possibly know that?" She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with intellectual fire. "Because the sentence structure has no adverbs. It's a feature of very early languages. And the repetition of triconsonantal roots. It matches patterns I saw in a documentary once. I just remembered it was the key." With this new understanding, Elara began to unlock Croft's communications at an astonishing rate. They learned about his strategies, his targets, his timeline. They were no longer defending. They were anticipating. Thorn Industries began to rally, plugging financial holes and cutting off Croft's avenues of attack before he could even launch them. The mood in the executive suite shifted from panic to a tense, hopeful confidence. But as Elara's influence grew, so did Marcus Vance's resentment. He couldn't stand seeing this nobody, this cleaner, being treated as a savant. He saw Julian's growing admiration for her, the way his gaze would soften when he looked at her, and his resentment curdled into a venomous jealousy. He decided he had to destroy her. He began his own secret investigation, using his resources to dig into Elara's past, searching for any dirt he could find. He planted rumors among the board members about Julian's new consultant, painting her as a charlatan who had somehow hypnotized their CEO. He knew that to bring down Elara, he would have to make her look not just incompetent, but dangerous. His opportunity came when Elara uncovered the final, devastating piece of Croft's plan. It was a multi-pronged digital assault, codenamed Phoenix Fire, designed to trigger a catastrophic stock sell-off and cripple Thorn Industries' infrastructure, allowing Croft to sweep in and buy up the company for pennies on the dollar. The attack was scheduled for the following Friday at the opening bell. Elara worked feverishly, mapping out the entire attack sequence, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. As she compiled the final report, a high-priority email alert flashed on her screen. It was from a secure, internal server containing a file labeled Phoenix Fire, Final Key, Believing it to be a last-minute piece of intelligence from Julian's security team, she opened it. Her computer screen went black for a second, then returned to normal. She thought nothing of it, attaching her completed report to an email and sending it directly to Julian and David Chun. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been watching her. The email was from him, spoofed to look like an internal security alert. The file she opened was not a key. It was a Trojan horse. It didn't harm her computer. It simply copied her entire report and, more importantly, logged the action from her terminal, making it look like she was uploading sensitive data to an external, untraceable server. The trap was set. The final battle for Thorn Industries was about to begin, but the first casualty was destined to be Alara herself. The emergency board meeting was convened in an atmosphere of suffocating tension. The air in the 60th floor boardroom crackled with fear and suspicion. Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his face a grim mask of control. David Chun stood beside him, his expression deeply troubled. On the large screen behind them was a countdown timer, ticking down the final hour until the New York Stock Exchange opened. Alara sat in a chair slightly behind Julian, feeling the hostile glares of the board members like physical blows. She was the outsider, the anomaly, the janitor playing in a king's court, and they all knew it. Before Julian could even begin to lay out Alara's findings and their plan to counter the Phoenix fire attack, Marcus Vance stood up, his voice ringing with false sincerity and righteous indignation. Before we proceed, Julian, there is a far more immediate and insidious threat we must address. A threat from within this very room. He pointed a dramatic, trembling finger directly at Alara. This woman, he boomed, is a spy. A collective gasp went through the room. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Julian's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. Choose your next words very carefully. Marcus smiled. A predator's thin, cruel smile. He tapped a tablet in front of him, and a new set of data appeared on the main screen. It was a network security log. At 3:47 this morning, a highly sensitive file containing a complete breakdown of Silas Croft's attack strategy. A file compiled by Ms. Vance herself, was uploaded from her secure terminal to an anonymous server traced to a location in Macau. A server known to be a hub for corporate espionage. She has sold us out to the highest bidder. The log was damning. It showed her user ID, her terminal, the exact time, and the file name. It was undeniable. The board members erupted in a chorus of angry, panicked accusations. "I knew it!" one of them shouted. She was too good to be true. Alara was speechless, her mind reeling. She looked at the log, at the cold, hard data that declared her a traitor. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I didn't. I would never." "Of course you would deny it," Marcus retorted, his voice dripping with scorn. "You are a nobody, a cleaner who saw an opportunity to get rich. You played on Julian's sympathies, and now you have betrayed him. You have betrayed all of us." He turned his attack on Julian. "And you, Julian, you brought this viper into our nest. Your recklessness, your sentimentality, has doomed this company. The company your father built." Julian didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at the furious faces of his board. He looked only at Alara. He saw the genuine shock, the hurt, the terrified confusion in her eyes. He had spent weeks watching this woman, learning about her quiet strength, her unshakable integrity. He had seen the way she cared for her mother, the way she spoke of her past without a hint of bitterness. His gut, the instinct that had made him a billionaire, screamed that this was a lie. But the evidence was absolute. For a moment, the Ice King wavered. The legacy, the pressure, the fear of failure all crashed down on him. Then he remembered the quiet moments in her office, the shared silence, the look in her eyes when she finally cracked the Sumerian code. He had to make a choice. Trust the data or trust the person. "She didn't do it," Julian said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the chaos. The room fell silent. Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You can't be serious. The proof is right there. You're choosing her over your own company. I am choosing to believe in the person I have come to know over a data log that can be faked." Julian stated, his gaze unwavering. He turned to David Chen. David. Her background check. The full file. Now David, who had been silently observing, nodded grimly. He tapped his own tablet, and a new file replaced the security log on the screen. It was Alara's life story, laid bare. Years of perfect work attendance at menial jobs. Glowing character references from past supervisors who called her the most honest person they'd ever met. And then, the final, crucial piece of information. 5 years prior, Alara had found a wallet in a public library. Inside was over $10,000 in cash. She was broke, facing eviction, and desperate. The wallet had no ID. No one would have ever known. She turned it in to the police without a second thought, and the incident was documented in a small, local newspaper article David's investigators had uncovered. "This is the woman you are calling a traitor," David said, his voice quiet but firm. "A woman who, when faced with desperation, chose integrity over a fortune. Does that sound like someone who would sell out this company now?" A seed of doubt was planted among the board members. But Marcus was not done. "A touching story. Proves nothing. The network log doesn't lie." It was then that Alara's mind, which had been frozen in shock, began to work again. The patterns. It was always about the patterns. The email. The file name final key. The screen flicker. It wasn't a normal system glitch. "The email," she said, her voice finding its strength. "This morning, I received an email with a file. It was designed to look like an internal security alert. When I opened it, my screen flickered. It was a Trojan horse. It must have been. Copied my file and spoofed the upload," Marcus sneered. "A convenient fantasy. Can you prove it?" "No," Alara admitted, her heart sinking. The originating data would have been wiped. The clock on the wall showed 10 minutes until the market opened. The attack was imminent. The room was a powder keg, ready to explode. All eyes were on Julian. His entire world was balanced on the edge of a knife. He walked over to Alara, standing between her and the hostile board. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw not the CEO, not the Ice King, but just Julian. Vulnerable, determined, and full of a fierce, protective trust. "I believe you," he said, for her and her alone to hear. Then he turned back to the room. "We are wasting time. Marcus, you are suspended from all duties, pending a full investigation. Security, escort him out." Marcus's face turned purple with rage. "You're insane. You're destroying everything." As 2 security guards moved towards him, Julian turned his attention to the screen. "Alara, the counterattack. Talk me through it." Now, with renewed purpose, Alara stood and walked to the head of the table. Her voice, once hesitant, was now clear and confident. She laid out the plan she had developed. A brilliant, intricate defense that would not only block Croft's Phoenix fire, but turn it back on him, exploiting the very backdoors he planned to use. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that required perfect timing. As she spoke, David Chen, ever the meticulous lawyer, was furiously typing on his tablet. He had an idea. He sent a discreet message to the head of IT. "Check Marcus Vance's terminal activity for 3:45 this morning. Specifically, look for any masked or rerouted outgoing messages. Urgent." The final minutes ticked away. Guided by Alara, Julian's team executed the defensive maneuvers. At 9:30 a.m., as the opening bell rang, a wave of chaos hit the market, just as Croft had planned. Thorn Industries stock began to plummet. But then, something unexpected happened. The sell-off stopped. The digital attacks hitting their servers were being rerouted, neutralized. And then the counterattack launched. Croft's own systems were suddenly flooded, his trading algorithms thrown into disarray by the very weapon he had designed. Panic erupted in Croft's war room. Within minutes, his offensive had completely collapsed, and the digital blowback was causing catastrophic damage to his own holdings. In the Thorn Industries boardroom, they watched the stock price stabilize, then begin to climb. A wave of relieved, breathless cheers filled the room. They had done it. They had survived. In the midst of the celebration, David Chen's tablet pinged. He read the message from IT, and a grim smile touched his lips. He walked over to Julian and showed him the screen. "Got him," David said. The IT team had found it. A cleverly hidden data packet sent from Marcus's terminal just 2 minutes before Alara had received her Trojan horse. It was the digital fingerprint of his betrayal. Marcus hadn't just framed Alara. He had been the mole all along, feeding information to Silas Croft in exchange for a high-ranking position in the new company. His attempt to frame Alara was a desperate, final act to cover his tracks and remove the one person who could have exposed him. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus Vance was fired, disgraced, and facing a litany of federal charges. Silas Croft's company, crippled by the failed attack and the subsequent investigation, was shattered. Thorn Industries, on the other hand, emerged stronger than ever, its victory a legend on Wall Street. But the real story wasn't about the stock prices or the corporate warfare. It was about what happened in that boardroom and in the quiet moments that followed. Alara was no longer the ghost in the hallways. She was given a new title, Chief Strategic Analyst, and an office with a panoramic view that rivaled Julian's. She paid off every last one of her mother's medical bills, moving her into the finest care facility in the state. She had her life back, a life she had never even dared to dream of. One evening, weeks later, she stood with Julian in his office, looking out at the same city that had once seemed so vast and indifferent. The lights twinkled below them like a fallen constellation. The silence between them was no longer just a shared space. It was filled with unspoken understanding, with respect, admiration, and a deep, burgeoning affection. "You know," Julian said, his voice a low rumble beside her, "my father always told me that in business, you can't trust anyone, that you have to build walls of ice around yourself to survive." He turned to look at her, a genuine warm smile reaching his eyes for the first time. He was wrong. You just have to find the one person worth tearing them down for. Alara looked up at him, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. In this man's eyes, she was not invisible. She was not the cleaner or the savant or the secret weapon. She was Alara, and she was finally truly seen. "He was also wrong about something else," she replied softly. "He probably thought the greatest assets were the ones you could see on a balance sheet." Julian's smile widened. "And what's the greatest asset?" "The one no one else has the vision to look for," she said. He reached out, his hand gently taking hers. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect fit. The connection between them was no longer just about data and patterns. It was about two lonely souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. "So, I ask you again, what is the true measure of a person's worth? Perhaps it has nothing to do with where they start. Perhaps it has everything to do with the courage to be who you are, the integrity to stand by your principles, and the vision to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Look around you, in the person who serves your coffee, the one who drives the bus, the one who quietly does the work no one else wants to do. There are hidden gifts everywhere, waiting to be discovered. The question is, will you be the one who finally stops to look? Share this story if you believe in the power of seeing the unseen, and tell us in the comments about a time someone saw the hidden value in you.